Hitler could not be appeased, that this person had to be destroyed, that there was no negotiation possible with this force of evil in the world. And he became quite famously provocative in the Council on Foreign Relations, where he and David were the two youngest members. And my father embarrassingly challenged John Foster Dulles, who then believed that it was still possible to negotiate with the Germans. And then he went into civilian flight training while he worked at Tiffany and Company. His grandfather was Louis Hunter Tiffany. And he, which was another source of light. And he did civilian flight training because it was clear to him that air power would end the Second World War, would decide the Second World War. And he entered the Air Force as soon as he could and led a squadron that was bombers flying fortresses that were somehow lost over the Atlantic. Some people think sabotage, they don't know. But in any case, he was lost, and I never knew him. And when I read Mein Kampf, I did not know that my father had read Mein Kampf. But as I read it, it seemed to me to sum up this Israel test theme that I had voiced to Carolyn Blick. Because most people sort of quote all of Hitler's statements about vermin and insects and all these implications that he regarded Jews as somehow inferior to Aryans. But when you really read those chapters, all his critique is against the successes of Jews. Jews were superior to Aryans as entrepreneurs, superior in finance, superior in wealth creation, superior in the stock market. He goes through all these areas where Jews prevailed over Aryans, and he believes that this positive spiral of gains which capitalism could generate was somehow an illegitimate way to live your life. His view was that the world would be dominated by war and warrior ethics, by dog-eat-dog Darwinian struggles. He thought that people who created wealth were somehow cheating nature and the law of nature, which he saw as totally predatory and dog eat dog. So this was when I read this, and that further focused me on the Second World War. And as I wrote it, I found myself writing this book faster than I ever wrote any book before. And and it brought me to focus on how the U.S. really did win the Second World War. How did the West win the Second World War? And it seems to me that although most people focus on the movements of armies and the decisions of generals, it seemed to me that the real way the U.S. won the Second World War and actually prevailed after it was through the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project really posed an Israel test for America. Because all these scientists came from Europe. They were, in some ways, the wretched of the earth, fleeing murderous regimes in Europe, and came to the United States. And the United States welcomed them and put them in charge of the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project prevailed only Leslie Groves, who was in charge of it, and was the kind of conservative Christian that many people imagine somehow were the source of anti-Semitism. He chose Oppenheimer over Ernest Lawrence as head of the Manhattan Project, despite Lawrence's Nobel Prize and Oppenheimer's communist connections. And Villard and Wigner and all these figures, von Neumann above all, who actually made it possible for the West to prevail in the Second World War. And it was meeting in Israel test, not that made this possible. And then after the Second World War, you know, this post-war prosperity where the U.S. ended up prevailing in the economic and military competition after the Second World War and in the Cold War was again crucially facilitated by an Israel test. I came to understand this because several of my books have been on microchips and technology. And Microcosm, book I wrote in, I guess, the late 1980s, focused on Intel Corporation as the most important company in the world, the company that did really develop the microchips and make it a commercial product that ultimately became dominant in the world economy. It really imparted much of the value that has been created in the world economy since the 1970s when Intel emerged. And I always imagined that Intel was really an American story. It had immigrants in it. I always focused on the contributions of immigrants to Intel's phenomenal achievement. But I didn't focus on Israel, and since then I've discovered that the key to Intel's dominance, and thus the key to American success in microchips, because Intel is it. That's how the United States became the leading country in information technology, was mostly dependent on it, was heavily dependent on Israel. Doug Froman invented the non-volatile memory, the EEPROM, electrically programmable read-only memory. The essential point about the EEPROM was that it was a non-volatile memory, which means that it keeps its contents when the power goes off. So that if you're going to have a microchip business with millions of personal computers all over the place, you have to have some way that you can boot them up, some way to keep the crucial information when there is no power. And so this is why the EEPROM really was the key to the development of the personal computer industry. And it yielded between 75 and 80% of Intel's profits during its first 10 years, and really saved the company. And Doug Froman, an Israeli who studied at Berkeley, after this invention, he could do what he wanted at Intel, he thought, and he proposed that they open a design center in Israel. And Andy Grove was president of Intel, and he resisted the opening of a design center in Israel. Doug Froman went to Africa for a year to do charitable work, and finally Andy Grove said, "All right, start your design center." And he started the design center in Haifa and introduced the 8088 microprocessor, which was the microprocessor in the first IBM personal computer. And the 8087 microprocessor